My name is Cordelia Archer, but most people just call me Cordy. Though after what happened that Thanksgiving, I doubt any of my family will ever speak my name the same way again. I'm not sure when I first realized I was the invisible one at our family gatherings. Maybe it was the way Aunt Meredith would brush past me with her glass of Chardonnay, eyes darting around for someone more important to gossip with. Or the way my mother, Gloria, always introduced me with a half-hearted laugh. Cordy's between things right now, as if my life was a placeholder, a pause between more remarkable relatives. But that Thanksgiving, it was different. It was the last time they'd get to act like I didn't matter. And it all started with a roast turkey, a cramped kitchen chair, and a phone call that changed everything. The day began with me driving for 4 hours through drizzling rain to my mother's sprawling house in upstate New York. It's the kind of house that's just big enough to feel empty unless every room is full. I pulled into the driveway, my old Honda coughing a protest as I killed the engine. I sat there for a moment, forehead resting against the steering wheel. I'd been practicing what I'd say, what boundaries I'd set, but my stomach was already knotted tight. Inside, the smell of rosemary and sage hit me the second I stepped through the door. My cousins were already there, shrieking laughter from the den. Aunt Meredith was perched on the sofa, her legs crossed delicately, wine glass already half empty. My mother emerged from the kitchen in a haze of steam and the sharp scent of onions. "Cordy, you're late," she said, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a shove. "Hi, Mom. Traffic was awful," I murmured, trying to keep my voice steady. She stepped back, giving me the once-over. I knew she didn't like my thrift store coat or my scuffed boots. She'd always said I dressed like a drifter. I'd grown used to it. Dinner was at 2. By 1:30, everyone was seated at the long mahogany table, except me. I stood awkwardly by the sideboard, balancing a plate of turkey and mashed potatoes, while the seats filled up one by one. Cousin Blake slid in next to his new fiancée, their elbows nudging into each other's ribs like they were the only two people in the world. Uncle Frank took the seat at the head of the table, carving knife already in hand. When I realized there was no spot left for me, I looked at my mother. She pretended not to see me. Finally, Aunt Meredith arched a perfectly plucked brow. "Oh, Cordelia, could you just eat in the kitchen? There's barely room as it is." It was like the world fell quiet for a heartbeat. No one looked up. No one defended me. Not even my mother. "Sure," I said, my voice so small it barely felt like mine. I scooped up my plate and made my way to the cold linoleum kitchen. There was a chair pulled up to the counter, right by the sink piled high with greasy pans. It smelled like dish soap and overcooked green beans. I sat there, the laughter from the dining room filtering in through the swinging door. Every clink of a wine glass felt like a nail hammered into my ribs. I picked at the turkey. Dry. Overdone. Maybe it was me who was overdone. Overcooked by all the years of trying to be seen. I was halfway through forcing down that cold stuffing when my phone buzzed on the counter. I almost ignored it. Didn't want to look rude, even if no one was watching. But something made me swipe it open. Unknown number. Normally I'd let that go to voicemail. But maybe I wanted an excuse not to listen to the shrieks of laughter behind that door. "Hello? Is this Cordelia Archer?" The voice was smooth, professional. "A man, yes?" I said, my fork halfway to my mouth. "This is Thomas Whitlock, from Whitlock and Associates. I'm your grandfather's estate lawyer." My fork clattered onto the plate. I think you have the wrong." "No mistake, Ms. Archer. I was instructed to call you today. It's about your grandfather's will." I felt the words echo in my head. Grandfather, will, estate. My grandfather, Horace Archer, had died 3 months ago. The funeral had been another performance. My mother crying crocodile tears while I stood at the edge of the cemetery. An afterthought in a black coat that smelled faintly of mothballs. "Why are you calling me now?" I asked, my voice cracking. "There have been some updates. It's crucial that you come in tomorrow to discuss your inheritance." Inheritance. I could barely breathe. I stared at the swinging door to the dining room. Their voices rose and fell in waves of forced cheer. They didn't even know what was happening behind this greasy sink. They didn't know that the girl they'd pushed into the kitchen was about to become something they'd never imagined. "Cordelia?" Thomas's voice cut through my thoughts. Can you be at our Manhattan office tomorrow at 9? I swallowed hard. Yes. Yes, I'll be there. Good. Bring a valid ID, and Cordelia, congratulations. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, the dull ache in my chest replaced by something sharp and bright. I could feel it buzzing through my veins. A reckless hope, a surge of defiance. I wasn't just the family's leftover anymore. I looked down at my plate of cold turkey and pushed it away. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked back into that dining room. They all turned to look at me, forks frozen in midair. I'm leaving, I said. My mother's mouth opened, but I didn't let her speak. Thanks for dinner. I pushed through the door, my heart hammering so loud it drowned out the stunned silence behind me. As I stepped out into the icy November air, I didn't feel the cold. I felt the fire inside me roaring to life. Tomorrow they'd know exactly who I was, and they'd regret every single time they made me eat in the kitchen. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. The next morning, I barely slept. I spent the night pacing around my shoebox apartment, the shadows of the city creeping across the cracked paint on my walls like long, grasping fingers. Every so often, I'd catch sight of my reflection in the black window, my face pale, my hair a mess, my eyes wide with a kind of fear I couldn't name. By 5, I'd showered and dressed in the best clothes I owned, a simple navy dress, a gray coat that didn't quite fit right on the shoulders. I drank burnt coffee from a chipped mug, watching the dawn break over the rooftops like a bruise fading to gold. I kept replaying the lawyer's voice in my head. Updates. Inheritance. Congratulations. The subway ride into Manhattan felt unreal. My mind floated above the screeching rails, the faces buried in phones and scarves, and the smell of rain clinging to damp coats. I imagined all the ways this could go wrong. Maybe he'd called the wrong Cordelia Archer. Maybe it was some clerical error, and I'd walk into that glossy office only to be turned away, humiliated. When the train lurched to my stop, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. The building for Whitlock and Associates was a tower of glass and steel on Fifth Avenue. I paused in front of the revolving doors, my breath misting in the crisp November air. People in tailored suits brushed past me, their steps brisk, their eyes blank. Inside, the lobby smelled like leather and money. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect hair and a headset perched on her sleek bob, looked up at me with mild surprise. I must have looked out of place. My coat, my thrift store boots. But I lifted my chin. Cordelia Archer. I have an appointment with Mr. Whitlock. She typed something into her computer, her nails clicking like tiny hammers. Of course. Take the elevator to the 43rd floor. He's expecting you. The write-up was silent, but my heart wasn't. It banged so hard I could feel it in my ears. The doors opened to a hallway so white it almost hurt my eyes. A wall of glass gave a view of the city below. Tiny cars, tiny people, tiny buildings. For once, I didn't feel tiny at all. Mr. Whitlock's office was a cathedral of dark wood and heavy books. He stood as I entered, a man in his 60s, with silver hair and an immaculately tailored suit. His eyes were kind, which unnerved me even more. Miss Archer, he said, extending a hand. I'm glad you could come. Please, just Cordelia, I said, gripping his hand like it was an anchor. Sit, please. He gestured to a leather chair that felt like it might swallow me whole. He opened a thick folder on his desk and peered at me over reading glasses. Your grandfather's estate was more complex than initially thought. He left you the entirety of his personal holdings. I blinked. All of it? I thought my mother. Whitlock nodded slowly. Yes, your mother assumed she'd inherit the bulk, but your grandfather added a codicil to the will 3 weeks before he passed. He left it all to you. His house in Connecticut, the stocks, the offshore accounts, and the company shares. I felt my mouth go dry. Why me? Whitlock leaned back, steepling his fingers. Horace Archer was a stubborn man. He said you were the only one who ever came to visit him without an agenda. He knew you didn't want anything but a cup of tea and a story or two. He wanted you to have the chance he thought he never gave your mother, My vision blurred. I remembered those afternoons in his study, the smell of old books and pipe smoke, the stories he'd told me about how he'd built Archer Holdings from a tiny shipping firm into an empire. He trusted you, Whitlock said softly. I wiped my eyes with the sleeve of my coat. So what does that mean? What do I do? He pushed a document toward me, a sheaf of papers that looked dense with legal jargon. It means you're now the majority shareholder of Archer Holdings and the executor of the estate. I'll guide you through every step, but you need to sign here to accept. My hands shook as I picked up the pen. The ink felt permanent, a line I couldn't uncross. When I finished, he stood and smiled. Congratulations, Ms. Archer. Or should I say, Chairwoman Archer? The word echoed in my head all the way back down the elevator. Chairwoman. Majority shareholder. Executor. I stumbled onto the street, the city spinning around me. I wanted to laugh and scream all at once. I called a cab and gave the driver the address to my grandfather's estate. The house in Connecticut had always been like something out of a forgotten time. Red brick, ivy climbing the walls, windows that glowed warm against the encroaching dark. It felt like stepping into a memory when I pushed open the heavy front door. Dust motes danced in the late afternoon light that slanted through the tall windows. The housekeeper, Mrs. Bright, met me at the door, her eyes wide with a mix of relief and worry. Miss Cordelia, we heard. Well, we didn't know when you'd come. The staff have kept it all in order, just as Mr. Archer wanted. She led me through the halls, the portraits of stern-faced archers watching us like silent judges. My fingers brushed the banister of the grand staircase. I could almost hear my grandfather's voice echoing down the halls. Would you like some tea? Mrs. Bright asked, her hands wringing in her apron. I nodded. She led me to the study, a cavernous room lined with shelves that held books older than I could fathom. I sank into the leather chair by the fireplace and let the warmth seep into my bones. The will, the company, the money. It was all so unreal. The tea arrived with a delicate clink. I held the cup, letting the steam wash over my face. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from my mother. Mom, asterisk, Cordelia, we need to talk. I stared at the words, my pulse thudding in my ears. She'd found out. Of course she had. Word must have traveled fast. Gossip in my family spread like wildfire when there was money involved. Before I could respond, another text appeared. Mom, asterisk, we're coming by tonight. Don't do anything stupid. I slammed the phone down so hard the tea sloshed over the rim of the cup. The heat bit at my fingers, but I didn't care. She was coming here, to asterisk my house now. I stood and paced the study. The smell of old leather and firewood grounded me. For the first time in my life, I had power. Real power. But I didn't know how to wield it. Not yet. The doorbell rang just as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the windows in bruised purples and pinks. Mrs. Bright hurried to answer it, her footsteps echoing down the tiled hallway. Voices drifted in. My mother's sharp tone. Uncle Frank's deep, blustery laugh. Aunt Meredith's fake sweetness dripping like poisoned honey. I stayed rooted to the spot until they burst into the study like a swarm of bees, buzzing with thin smiles and greedy eyes. Cordelia! My mother exclaimed, spreading her arms as if we were about to embrace. Darling, I heard the most ridiculous thing. Why didn't you call me? I folded my arms over my chest. What did you hear? That you're the executor. That you've inherited everything. Surely there's been a mistake. We can sort it out, of course. It must be some oversight. Horace couldn't possibly have meant to shut us out. I watched her face, the way her lips pinched when she realized I wasn't going to jump in and reassure her. Uncle Frank stepped forward, reeking of expensive cologne and old money. Cordy, sweetheart, this is big. You need family to guide you. You're young. You've never handled anything like this. Let us help. We'll take care of it all for you. You don't want the headache, trust me. I almost laughed. I could see it now, clear as crystal. The way they'd maneuver me out, sign a few papers, pat me on the head and send me back to my apartment with a token check while they kept the empire for themselves. No, I said. The word tasted new and bright on my tongue. I'm not handing it over. Grandfather chose me, and I'm going to honor that." Aunt Meredith's eyes flashed. "Don't be naive. You think you can run a company? Live in this house alone. You'll drown. Don't be foolish, Cordelia. Family takes care of family." I felt something shift in my spine, like steel growing where there'd only been jelly before. I looked each of them in the eye, my voice calm but sharp. Family didn't care when I was eating Thanksgiving dinner alone in the kitchen. Family didn't care when I scraped by to pay rent while you all drank champagne on the veranda. Grandfather saw that. He saw me. And now you will too. My mother's face twisted, a vein pulsing at her temple. "You'll regret this. You don't know what you're doing. You'll ruin everything." I stepped closer, close enough to smell the floral perfume she always wore, a scent that had once comforted me, now cloying and sour. "Then I'll ruin it my way," I whispered. The room fell silent. Uncle Frank's face was purple with rage. Aunt Meredith's lips were pressed so tight they were white. My mother just stared at me like she didn't recognize the girl in front of her. I turned my back to them and sat in Grandfather's old chair. It felt right, like the throne he'd built for me long before I ever knew it existed. "You should go," I said softly, my fingers trailing along the carved wood of the armrest. "The staff will show you out." Mrs. Bright stood in the doorway, her eyes wide but proud. She'd heard every word. She gave me a small nod as she ushered them out, their protests echoing through the hall like the last gasp of something rotting. I sat there long after the front door slammed shut, the fire crackling at my back. I knew this was just the beginning. They'd come for me in ways I couldn't yet imagine: legal battles, manipulation, lies whispered behind boardroom doors. But they'd never make me eat in the kitchen again. This time, I'd make them kneel at my table. I rose before dawn, slipping into one of my grandfather's old wool sweaters that I'd found in the cedar wardrobe. It smelled faintly of pipe smoke and aftershave, like a memory wrapping around my shoulders. I padded barefoot through the hall to the study, where the embers in the fireplace still glowed faintly. I poked them back to life and sat cross-legged on the rug, a legal pad balanced on my knees. I made a list: my grandfather's assets, the names of the board members, the investments I didn't fully understand. I wrote down questions. So many questions. I was honest with myself about what I didn't know. I underlined the biggest fear: they will try to take this away from me. By the time the sun rose, my list had grown to 4 pages. My handwriting was cramped and uneven, but each line steadied me. I wasn't going to let them circle me like sharks. I needed allies, and the first place to find them was at Archer Holdings itself. When Mrs. Bright appeared with tea, I asked her to find the number for the company's headquarters. She hesitated at first, her brow furrowed, but when I explained that I wanted to meet with the executive team, something like respect flickered across her eyes. She scribbled the number on a pad and handed it to me. I made the call standing in the study, my voice trembling only once when the receptionist put me on hold to transfer me to the CEO's assistant. "Ms. Archer," a crisp voice answered. "We've been expecting your call." I was startled. "You have?" "Yes, of course. There have been discussions. Would you like to come in today?" I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. An hour later, I stood in front of Archer Holdings headquarters, a sleek, modern skyscraper that looked like it might pierce the sky itself. The revolving doors swallowed me whole. The marble lobby gleamed under harsh white lights, and the logo, a stylized ship's wheel, was carved into the wall behind the reception desk. The elevator whisked me to the top floor. My reflection in the polished steel doors showed a girl who looked calm on the outside, but felt like she might dissolve if she stood still too long. The conference room was bigger than my entire apartment. The view from the floor-to-ceiling windows was dizzying. A long table stretched across the room, surrounded by men and women in tailored suits who turned to look at me all at once. I recognized 2 faces immediately: Elliot Porter, the current CEO, and Beatrice Yates, the CFO. I'd seen their names in the news when my grandfather died. They stood as I entered, their polite smiles so practiced they felt brittle. "Ms. Archer," Elliot said, gesturing to the seat at the head of the table. "Thank you for coming in. Please, sit." I did. I felt small in that chair, my feet not quite touching the ground. I rested my hands in my lap so they wouldn't see them shake. "We'd like to offer our deepest condolences once more," Beatrice said, her voice smooth as silk. "Your grandfather was a remarkable man." "Thank you," I murmured. Elliot cleared his throat, folding his hands on the table. "Cordelia. May I call you Cordelia?" I nodded. "Good. I know this is all very new for you. Archer Holdings is a complex entity. The day-to-day operations, the board relations, the investments. It's a lot for anyone, let alone someone who's never worked in corporate governance before." I bristled, but I forced myself to stay still. "That's why we want to make this transition as smooth as possible," he continued. "We'd like to propose that you appoint a proxy to act on your behalf at board meetings. Someone who understands the company, the market, the stakeholders. It would be purely temporary, of course." Beatrice's smile didn't reach her eyes. "It would allow you to acclimate at your own pace, without the burden of decisions you may not feel ready to make." There it was. The first hook. The first attempt to gently pry the power from my fingers, before I even learned how to hold it. I didn't sleep that night either. The grandfather clock in the foyer struck every hour, its heavy chime carrying through the quiet halls like a warning. I lay in the massive bed that used to be my grandfather's, the covers tucked up to my chin, staring at the ceiling's ornate plasterwork. I could almost see shadows twisting into the shape of my family's faces. My mother's cold smile, Uncle Frank's flushed anger, Aunt Meredith's tight, furious mouth. I had made my choice, but the gravity of it settled over me like a weighted blanket. In the daylight, my resolve felt unshakable. In the dark, doubt seeped through every crack. I sat up straighter. "And who would you suggest for this proxy?" Elliot's smile widened. "I would be honored to stand in for you if you'd like. I've been with Archer Holdings for nearly 20 years. Your grandfather trusted me implicitly." I could almost hear my grandfather's dry laugh in the back of my mind. "Trust but verify, Cordy. Always verify." I folded my hands on the table, mimicking Elliot's posture. "No." The word dropped into the silence like a stone into water. Ripples of surprise spread across their carefully composed faces. "No?" Beatrice echoed, blinking. I shook my head. "I appreciate the offer, but my grandfather made me the majority shareholder and executor for a reason. If I'm going to run this company, I need to understand it. I'll learn, and I'll make my own decisions." Elliot's smile twitched, just once. "Of course, but surely you'll want advisors, people to guide you." "I'll choose them myself," I said. "And I'll be at every board meeting from now on." Beatrice's fingers drummed on the table, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. "That's ambitious, Ms. Archer. This isn't just a family business. There are investors, partners, competitors." "I know what it is," I cut in. "And I know exactly what's at stake. Which is why I'll be involved in everything." I stood. The room seemed to grow around me, the table stretching into infinity, but I felt taller than I ever had. "Thank you for your time," I said. "I look forward to working with you." When I stepped out into the hallway, my knees nearly gave out. I pressed my back against the cool marble wall and let out a shaky breath. I didn't know if I'd just made the right move or the first of many mistakes. But it was mine. Back at the estate, Mrs. Bright met me at the door with a worried look. "There's a man waiting for you in the study," she said. I froze. "Who?" She shrugged helplessly. "He wouldn't give a name. He said you'd want to hear what he has to say." My pulse quickened. I slipped out of my coat and crept toward the study. The door was ajar. I pushed it open slowly. A man sat in my grandfather's chair, his legs crossed casually, a manila folder resting on his knee. He looked up as I entered, his face unfamiliar, mid-30s, hair neatly combed, eyes that missed nothing. "Ms. Archer," he said, standing. "It's an honor to finally meet you." I didn't move closer. "Who are you?" He smiled. "I represent some interested parties. People who believe you may need help protecting what's yours." I narrowed my eyes. "I don't need protection from strangers." Perhaps not. But you might need information. He held out the folder. Consider this a goodwill gesture. Take a look inside. I hesitated, then stepped forward and took it. I flipped it open. The first page made my stomach drop. It was a copy of an email chain between Elliot Porter and Beatrice Yates. Subject line: Transition Plan. They were already making moves. Drafting proposals to the board to strip my voting rights. Planning to leak stories to the press about my inexperience and instability. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. The man just smiled. "We have our ways, there's more if you want it. But nothing is free in this world, Ms. Archer." I snapped the folder shut. "What do you want?" "For now? Nothing but your attention. You have enemies in places you don't even know exist yet. When you're ready to level the playing field, call me." He placed a business card on the desk and rose. "I'll see myself out." I watched him go, my fingers gripping the folder so tight my knuckles turned white. When I finally sank into the chair, I opened the folder again and read every word. I knew then that the fight was going to get ugly. But I also knew something else. They'd underestimated me for the last time. I wasn't going to be the girl in the kitchen anymore. I was going to be the storm that tore their house down. The air in the study felt thicker after that man left, like the walls themselves were closing in, listening to every word, memorizing every secret. I sat there for what felt like hours, the folders spread open across my grandfather's massive oak desk. Words and phrases seared themselves into my mind: remove voting rights, unfit to lead, public confidence. Each line a reminder that my new reality was a chessboard, and I'd been dropped into the middle of it with a target pinned to my back. I could almost hear my grandfather's voice in my head again. "Never play your hand too soon, Cordy. Let them think they're winning. That's when you strike." But I didn't know how to strike. Not yet. Mrs. Bright knocked softly, peeking her head in like she'd been waiting for the storm to settle. She carried a tray. 2 cups of tea this time, the good china. She placed it in front of me, her hands trembling just slightly. "You look pale, Miss Cordelia," she said. "Have you eaten anything?" I shook my head. "I'm not hungry." She gave me a gentle look that made something twist in my chest. "Even warriors need their strength." I cracked a weak smile. "Is that what I am now?" "Seems to me you've always been." She set a small plate of buttered toast beside the tea and quietly left, the door clicking shut behind her. I forced myself to eat, the toast dry but grounding. My phone buzzed on the desk. Another text, this one from an unknown number. Unknown. Asterisk. "I can help you if you want to fight back. Midnight. South Garden. Come alone." I stared at the message until the words blurred. The South Garden was a walled courtyard behind the estate. Overgrown now, the stone path cracked by weeds. But it had been my grandfather's favorite spot once. Midnight. Alone. It sounded like the start of a bad thriller. But I had no choice. If I was going to stay ahead of Elliot and Beatrice, I needed information. Allies. Maybe even weapons. Midnight came slowly. I spent the evening combing through more documents I found in the study. Old letters from board members, financial statements, handwritten notes from my grandfather. Each paper felt like a clue, a piece of armor. I had to know this world inside out if I wanted to survive it. At 11:55, I pulled on a heavy coat and slipped out the back door. The estate was silent, the winter wind biting at my cheeks. I followed the stone path to the garden gate, its hinges squealing like they hadn't been oiled in years. A figure stood near the old marble fountain, its basin dry and cracked. He was tall, lean, dressed in dark clothes that seemed to swallow the moonlight. "You came," he said. His voice was familiar. I realized it was the same man from the study. "You didn't give me much choice," I said, my breath fogging the cold air. He chuckled. "Fair. Do you know who I am yet?" I shook my head. He stepped closer, the gravel crunching under his boots. "My name's Gabriel Quinn. I work for a firm that specializes in unconventional solutions. Your grandfather used our services from time to time." "Services?" He gave me a look that told me he wouldn't spell it out. Let's just say we protect assets when others would rather steal them. I crossed my arms, partly for warmth, partly to hold myself together. So what do you want with me? Nothing you can't afford, he said with a sly grin. I'm offering you an opportunity, information, leverage, a way to hold your ground when they push. And what do you get out of it? A client, he said simply. One who'll need us for a long time, I suspect. I hesitated. Every instinct in me screamed not to trust this man, but every instinct also knew I couldn't do this alone. My family had money, connections, and the board wrapped around their fingers. I had an empty house, a legacy, and the ghost of a man who believed in me. Okay, I said finally. What do I have to do? He handed me a flash drive. First, you watch this. It's a compilation of emails, recordings, financial records. Proof that Elliot and Beatrice have been embezzling funds for years. My eyes widened. Why hasn't anyone stopped them? Because your grandfather kept them on a short leash. They knew he'd expose them if they stepped too far out of line. But when he got sick, let's just say they took advantage of the distraction. I turned the flash drive over in my gloved hand. So I just take this to the board? Not yet, he said sharply. Timing is everything. Drop this bomb too soon, and they'll spin it back on you. Wait until they make their move. When they're desperate and sloppy, that's when you strike. I thought of the list on my desk, the plans they'd been drafting. They're trying to push through a vote to remove my controlling interest. Exactly, Gabriel said. Let them try. And when they think they've won, you show the board what they've really been up to. My breath clouded in the dark, my pulse hammering like a drum. And you'll help me? Every step of the way, he said. For a price, of course. I looked him dead in the eyes. Then consider yourself hired. His smile was genuine this time. Good. I knew you were your grandfather's granddaughter. We stood there for a moment, the winter air crackling around us like static. Then he turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving me alone by the fountain. Back in the study, I plugged the flash drive into my grandfather's old laptop. The files opened like a trap door into another world. Emails with subject lines like Project Eclipse, spreadsheets with numbers that didn't add up, voice recordings of late-night calls that made my stomach turn. Elliot and Beatrice weren't just trying to oust me. They were bleeding the company dry. I stayed up all night again, making copies of the files, backing them up in places no one would think to look. When the first hint of dawn painted the windows, I felt the exhaustion in my bones, but my mind was clear. They thought they could corner me, but I had my own teeth now. Later that day, I made my first call to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Miles Atwood, my grandfather's old attorney, a man so precise he made clocks seem sloppy. He answered on the second ring, his voice dry and amused. Miss Archer, I was wondering when you'd call. You know already, I said. Of course I do. Your mother and the others have been flapping their gums all week. They think you're a lamb they can herd. I grinned despite the knot in my stomach. Then I guess I need a wolf. I'm retired, Miles said, but I could hear the grin in his voice too. But for you, I'll dust off the old fangs. By noon, he was at the estate, a stack of folders tucked under one arm. He spread them across the study desk like a battlefield map. They'll try to push for an emergency vote, he said. You can block it, but you'll need allies on the board. They're loyal to Elliot, I said. Miles tapped a finger on one of the folders. Not all of them. Your grandfather had dirt on half these people. Debts, secrets, used them. The old Cordelia would have balked at that. Blackmail, manipulation, the dark art of survival. But the new Cordelia? She knew it was the only language these people spoke. We spent hours drafting letters, emails, phone scripts, lines I'd deliver one by one until the wavering board members remembered where their loyalties should lie. That night, I sat in my grandfather's leather chair, the flames crackling behind me. I called each one. My voice didn't tremble this time. I didn't beg or plead. I reminded them who really held the keys now. By the time the clock struck midnight, 3 more seats had shifted to my side. When I hung up the last call, I closed my eyes, feeling the exhaustion pull at me. But under it, a spark glowed, small but fierce. I wasn't just fighting back, I was winning. I stood and went to the window. The night outside was thick and starless, but I saw my reflection in the glass. A girl who had once eaten cold turkey in a kitchen, invisible to the people who claimed to love her. That girl was gone now. In her place was something sharper, stronger. A storm was coming, and this time I was the one who'd bring the thunder. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, legal documents, whispered conversations in dark hallways, and midnight strategy sessions that left my eyes bloodshot and my hands trembling from too much coffee. But every morning, I woke up stronger than the day before. The Cordelia, who used to swallow her words, was gone. Now I was learning to speak a language my family understood. Power. Miles Atwood was a force of nature. He'd moved into the guest room at the estate without asking, turning my grandfather's old breakfast nook into a makeshift war room. Papers littered the table. Notes about board members, stock options, clauses buried deep in the company's founding documents. Sometimes I caught him watching me over the rim of his reading glasses, like he was measuring how much steel I really had in my spine. On the 4th day, I called a full board meeting. Elliot Porter and Beatrice Yates tried to block it, of course, claiming I had no authority, that the paperwork hadn't cleared, that I was unstable. But Miles sent out a memo, quoting chapter and verse from the company bylaws, and suddenly they fell silent. The boardroom was an aquarium of tension when I walked in. 12 seats, 12 sharks, and me. The bleeding fish they thought they'd devour. But they didn't know I'd grown teeth of my own. Elliot greeted me with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Cordelia, you look well." I sat at the head of the table, the leather chair swallowing me up, but I didn't let them see my hands shake. "Let's get started." Beatrice leaned forward, her manicured nails tapping the glass table. "Before we begin, I'd like to propose we postpone this meeting until we can ensure Ms. Archer's mental fitness." I met her eyes. "Are you suggesting I'm not capable of handling this position?" "It's not personal," she purred. "It's about stability. For the company, the shareholders." "Stability?" I cut in. Funny word coming from someone who's been bleeding the company dry for years. The room fell silent. Elliot shot Beatrice a look, but she recovered quickly. "I'm sorry?" I slid the manila folder across the table. "Emails, bank transfers, offshore accounts. You've been stealing from Archer Holdings since before my grandfather died." Beatrice's face drained of color. "This is absurd." Elliot tried to speak, but I slammed my palm on the table. "Save it. You think I came in here blind? You thought you'd corner me, push me out, take what's mine." I leaned forward, my voice low and sharp. "I'm not your prey. I'm the predator now." I opened the folder, pulling out copies of emails and recordings Gabriel Quinn's flash drive had given me. I let the evidence speak for itself. Some board members shifted uncomfortably. Others looked intrigued, like they'd bet on the wrong horse. Beatrice sputtered. "This is fabricated." Miles, standing by the door like a silent guard dog, spoke up for the first time. "The files have been verified by a forensic accountant. If you'd like, we can bring in the SEC to sort this out publicly." The threat landed like a guillotine. Beatrice sank back into her chair, eyes darting around the room for someone, anyone, to rescue her. No one moved. Elliot's mask cracked for a split second. "What do you want?" I took a breath. "Your resignations. Today. And you sign a full confession, waiving any severance or golden parachute. If you don't, I'll make sure the press gets everything." Beatrice opened her mouth again, but Elliot put a hand on hers, silencing her. His eyes met mine, something like reluctant respect flickering there. "You've learned fast." "I had a good teacher," I said softly, glancing at Miles. Beatrice hissed, "You think you've won? You have no idea how this world works. You'll drown in it. Then watch me swim, I snapped. They signed the papers. Their signatures looked like tiny graves on white pages. Proof that I could hold my ground. Proof that the girl they'd shoved into the kitchen would never be shoved aside again. When they left the room, silence fell. The board sat stiff and nervous, waiting for me to stumble. I stood, my hands braced on the table. "We're not done," I said. Elliot and Beatrice were symptoms. The real disease is complacency. This company was built on my grandfather's sweat and blood. It will not be torn apart by parasites ever again. Some heads nodded. Some didn't. That was fine. They'd learn. After the meeting, I stepped out onto the balcony that overlooked the city. The wind whipped my hair around my face, cold and wild. Miles joined me, sliding his hands into his coat pockets. "You did well," he said. "I feel like I'm standing on a ledge." He nodded. "You are. But you're not falling." I looked at him. "Why did you help me?" His mouth twisted into a half smile. "Because Horace was the only man I ever respected. And because you remind me of him. Stubborn as hell." I laughed, the sound surprising even me. "I'll take that as a compliment." He patted my shoulder. "You should." That night, back at the estate, I sat by the fire in the study, the flickering flames casting shadows that danced on the bookshelves. My phone buzzed again. A text from Gabriel Quinn. "Gabriel, asterisk, nice move today. They won't be the last to come for you. Be readies." I typed back. "Always." I thought of my mother then, my cousins, Aunt Meredith, circling like vultures. They wouldn't stay quiet. I could almost hear them in my mind, plotting the next way to strip me bare. I stood and walked to my grandfather's portrait above the fireplace. His eyes seemed to follow me, a hint of a smile hidden in the lines of his face. "I hope I'm doing this right," I whispered. "I hope I'm making you proud." The wind rattled the window panes. Outside, the estate grounds lay cloaked in frost, but inside I felt the ember of something strong, a fire that wouldn't go out. I knew this wasn't over. The will, the company, the money, these were just the first battles. The real war was family, blood. The people who'd cut you deepest with a smile on their lips. I sat down at the desk, pulling my legal pad closer. I wrote 3 words at the top of the page. "Trust no one. Asterisk, asterisk." Then I wrote the next step. And the next. And the next. Because the girl who ate cold turkey in the kitchen was gone, and the woman sitting at this desk was ready to burn down every room they tried to lock her out of. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The first snowfall came 2 days after Elliot and Beatrice walked out of Archer Holdings for the last time. Heavy flakes drifted down over the estate's sprawling lawns, layering the bare hedges and the cracked garden path like nature's own hush. It made the world outside look soft, peaceful, like something out of a fairy tale. But I knew better now. Under the white there were thorns. Under the quiet, claws were sharpening. I woke to the hush of snow tapping at my window. For the first time in weeks, I let myself sleep past dawn. My dreams were jagged. Flashes of voices, my mother's hissed warnings, Elliot's mocking smile, Gabriel Quinn's shadowed grin. But every time I woke with my heart pounding, I'd remind myself, I had survived every battle so far. Mrs. Bright brought me breakfast in bed. A small act of kindness that made my chest ache. She was the only part of this house that felt like home. "You need rest, Miss Cordelia," she said, smoothing my blanket like she used to when I was a child visiting grandfather. "Your enemies won't stop just because you're tired." I forced a smile. "They should at least give me one snow day." She laughed, but it was tinged with worry. "Be careful. The snow hides footprints, but it also shows them." I knew what she meant. Everything looked clean now. Elliot and Beatrice gone. The board quiet. My control secure. But the silence was a lie. In the days since that boardroom showdown, I'd heard whispers through Gabriel's channels. Elliot was in talks with a rival company, trying to broker a deal to undermine Archer Holdings from the outside. Beatrice was leaking rumors to the press, planting stories about my mental instability and erratic leadership. And my mother, Gloria, was the worst of them all. She'd gone to the family lawyers, the family friends, the old money network that had propped her up for decades. They were plotting something, but I didn't know what yet. I spent that morning pacing the library, the heavy drapes drawn back so I could watch the snow pile up. Miles was on the phone in the study, his voice a low growl as he called in favors, debts, and threats in equal measure. Gabriel had disappeared into the city for days. Digging, he said cryptically, and all I could do was wait. By noon, I'd had enough of waiting. I put on my boots and my grandfather's old wool coat, the hem nearly brushing my calves. The cold bit at my cheeks, turning my breath to ghosts in the air. I walked the estate grounds, past the frozen fountain, the garden walls heavy with snow, the path where Gabriel had first handed me the folder that cracked my world open. It felt different now. Before, this house had been a fortress, a cage, and a mausoleum all at once. Now it felt like a battlefield, and I needed to learn every inch of it. I found myself in the greenhouse, a place I hadn't stepped into since I was a child. The glass panes were frosted, but the inside was warm, heaters still humming, plants growing in defiance of winter's chill. It smelled like earth and new life. I traced my fingers over the leaves of a lemon tree my grandfather had planted decades ago. It was still alive. I didn't know whether that comforted me or made me want to cry. That night, Gabriel returned. He came through the back door, brushing snow from his coat, his eyes sharp and bright. "They're moving faster than I thought," he said, tossing a folder on the kitchen table where I was nursing a cup of tea. "Who?" "Your mother. Elliot. Beatrice. They've joined forces. New lawyers, a shell company in the Caymans, a PR team ready to bury you. They're planning to challenge the will, claim you're unfit. If they win, you lose everything." I felt the blood drain from my face. "How?" "It's ironclad," Miles said. "Nothing's ironclad when enough money's involved," Gabriel cut in. "They're going to argue undue influence, emotional distress. They'll drag your name through the mud until you look like a fragile girl who snapped." I gripped my mug so hard, I thought it might crack. "What do I do?" Gabriel pulled up a chair, leaning in close. "You get ahead of it. You control the narrative. You show the world you're stronger than they ever imagined." I shook my head. "How?" "A press conference," he said, eyes glittering. "You stand up, in front of cameras, reporters, the whole city, and you tell your story. Your way. You show them you're not the little girl they remember. You're the rightful heir. And you'll fight." I wanted to laugh. The idea of standing in front of cameras made my skin crawl. But then I remembered that Thanksgiving table, the sound of laughter behind the dining room door while I sat alone in the kitchen with cold turkey. I'd spent my whole life invisible. Maybe it was time to be seen. I looked Gabriel in the eye. "Do it. Set it up," he grinned. "I'll get the best media coach I know. You'll need her." And that's how, 2 days later, I found myself standing in front of a mirror in my grandfather's bedroom, practicing lines with a woman named Claudia Vale, a former political consultant who'd turned fallen senators into phoenixes. She was a hurricane in pearls and a tailored suit, her hair pulled back so tight it looked like it might snap. "Again," she barked, "but this time, believe it." I swallowed, meeting my own eyes in the mirror. "I am Cordelia Archer. I am the rightful executor of Horace Archer's estate, and I will not be intimidated out of what he left me." Claudia clicked her tongue. "Good. Now lose the tremble at the end. They smell weakness like blood in the water." We practiced until my throat was raw. She adjusted my posture, my hand gestures the tilt of my chin. "When they throw questions at you, you don't flinch. You control the room. This is theater. You're the star." By the night before the press conference, I collapsed into bed, the lines echoing in my head like a mantra. Mrs. Bright pressed a cool cloth to my forehead and hummed an old lullaby I half remembered from my childhood visits. "You'll be brilliant, Miss Cordelia," she said softly. "They'll see you now." The next morning, I stood behind a podium at a downtown hotel, lights blinding, cameras clicking like 1,000 mechanical insects. My hands were steady on the wood. Miles stood at my side, Gabriel just behind the last row of reporters, his eyes locked on me. I cleared my throat. The room fell quiet. "Thank you for being here," I began, my voice echoing through the microphones. "There's been speculation, rumors, and outright lies about my right to lead Archer Holdings and carry on my grandfather's legacy. Today, I'm here to set the record straight." I spoke for 15 minutes, about my grandfather's trust in me, about the company's future, about integrity, about family, and what it really means. I didn't flinch when the questions came. Probing, sharp, dripping with skepticism. Claudia's voice rang in my head. "Control the room." When I stepped away from the podium, my knees almost gave out. Miles caught my elbow, steady as ever. "You did it," he murmured. Gabriel was waiting near the exit, his smile quick and fierce. They didn't see that coming. But as I climbed into the car, I felt the weight settle on my shoulders again. This wasn't over. I'd just painted a target bigger than ever. They'd come for me harder now. That night, the snow kept falling. I stood at my window, watching the white blanket cover every track, every scar. In the dark reflection, I saw myself, no longer the girl in the kitchen. A woman with the power to burn down every lie they tried to build. "Come for me," I whispered to the glass. "I'm ready." And somewhere deep in the house, I swear I could almost hear my grandfather's laughter, soft, proud, and just a little bit dangerous. The morning after the press conference, I woke up to the estate buzzing like a kicked beehive. My phone was a battlefield of calls, texts, and alerts. Some from news outlets wanting follow-ups. Some from board members who'd suddenly found a new respect for the kitchen girl, and too many from my mother's allies. Gloria Archer had never looked so polite on paper. Every message dripping with faux concern. "We should talk. I just want what's best for you, Cordelia. Maybe we can find a peaceful way to settle all this." Peaceful. It almost made me laugh. They never cared about peace when they let me eat alone by the sink, while they toasted their wine glasses over roast turkey. Now that I had power, they wanted peace? No. They wanted surrender. Miles and I spent the early hours in the sunroom, which had become his second office. Papers spread across the wicker table. He leaned back in his chair, peering at me over the rims of his glasses. "You rattled them," he said. "But that makes them dangerous. Gloria's not going to let you keep this without a war." "She never did like losing," I said. My voice was steady, but my stomach was a knot. "What's next?" He tapped a document. "They're going to challenge the will in probate court. Try to prove you coerced Horace when he was vulnerable. That you were manipulating him, isolating him." I flinched. "That's ridiculous. He trusted me. He asked for my company." "Doesn't matter. The truth's a toy to them. They'll twist it. They'll drag every mistake you've ever made into the light." Miles sighed, scratching at his stubble. "You need to be ready for that." Ready. Was anyone ever ready to have their life flayed open? When Gabriel arrived that afternoon, he brought the chill with him. He didn't bother with the back door this time. He strode through the front like he owned the place, tossing his gloves onto the entry table. "Morning, chairwoman," he said, smirking. "Nice speech yesterday. But you're about to be hit from 3 angles at once." He dropped a folder in front of me. Inside were photos, transcripts, screenshots. Proof that my mother had been feeding insider information to a rival investor. A name that made my blood run cold. Leland Hawthorne. He'd been circling Archer Holdings for years, sniffing for weakness. Apparently my mother was ready to sell him the scent. "She's offering him your grandfather's remaining properties in exchange for funding the lawsuit," Gabriel said. "If Hawthorne gets his claws in, he'll gut the company and walk away fat and happy." I closed the folder with a snap. "What do we do?" Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "You mean, what do you do? This is your chessboard now, Cordelia. You want to play defense forever, or do you want to make the first cut?" I knew what he was asking. The old me would have hesitated. But I'd watched them circle me like wolves for weeks. I'd eaten in the kitchen while they feasted in the dining room. I'd let them whisper that I was nothing, nobody, Too weak to hold my own. Not anymore. Dig up every dirty secret Hawthorne has, I said. Every shell company, every bribe, every mistress, every offshore account. And my mother? I want a list of her donors, her lawyers, every asset she's using against me. Then leak it. No, better. Hand it to the right people at the right time. Make them tear each other apart. Gabriel's smile was all teeth. That's my girl. Miles didn't look quite so gleeful. He closed his files with a sigh. You know this will burn every bridge you have left with her. I met his eyes. What bridge? She never let me cross it anyway. He couldn't argue with that. The next week was a study in organized chaos. Gabriel and his shadow network pulled strings I didn't know existed. Bank leaks, anonymous tips, carefully timed news pieces that painted Hawthorne as a fraud with 1 foot in prison. The rival investor started bleeding allies by the day. And my mother? Her messages changed from sweet concern to desperate rage. She called the estate at all hours, leaving voicemails that made Mrs. Bright flinch when she listened to them. How dare you? Gloria's voice crackled through the machine late one night like a ghost in the walls. You think you're better than me? You wouldn't even have that name if not for me. You're nothing without us, Cordelia. The first time I listened, I thought maybe the guilt would crack me open. But each word built a thicker shell instead. I let it play while I sat at my grandfather's old desk, penning letters to board members, clients, old friends who still had influence. I wouldn't hide from her voice anymore. On the 3rd day, my phone buzzed with a number I almost didn't recognize, Leland Hawthorne himself. Cordelia, he drawled, his tone the oily charm of a man who'd sold more promises than he'd ever kept. I think we should meet. You and I were not so different. I nearly laughed. Is that so? You want power. I want profit. We could help each other. I have ways to make the lawsuit disappear. A joint venture. Just think about it. You keep your company. I get a seat at the table. Your mother goes away quietly. It was so easy for him to say it, like he was offering me a glass of wine at Thanksgiving instead of a dagger wrapped in silk. Meet me, I said, my voice calm. Tomorrow. The estate. Noon. Excellent, he purred. I knew you'd be reasonable. Reasonable. The word felt like poison on my tongue. When the call ended, I found Gabriel pacing the hall like a caged panther. I told him everything. He just chuckled. Perfect, he said. Let him come here. Let him think you're the dough in the clearing. Then watch him walk right into your trap. Miles was more cautious. He pulled me aside in the study while Gabriel flipped through surveillance photos at the window. Cordelia, Miles said, voice low. Once you do this, you can't come back from it. You play hardball with Hawthorne and your mother, you'll be fighting them for years. Is that the life you want? I thought of the kitchen chair. The dry turkey. The laughter I heard through a closed door. I thought of my grandfather's smile when he told me, "You're the only one who really sees me, Cordy." I met Miles's tired eyes. It's not the life I want. It's the life they made for me. Noon the next day, Hawthorne's car rolled up the snowy drive. A sleek black machine that looked like it belonged in a villain's garage. He stepped out dressed in a suit worth more than my first car, a scarf draped just so, his cologne drifting ahead of him like a warning. Mrs. Bright opened the door for him, her mouth tight. He swept past her like she was furniture. I waited in the study, the fire crackling at my back. Gabriel stood behind a hidden door in the library next door. Just in case. Hawthorne greeted me with that same snake smile. Cordelia. Lovely place. Shame if you lost it. I didn't offer him tea. I didn't offer him a seat. You came for a deal, I said. So let's deal. He spread his hands. Mutual benefit. You let me buy in. I take care of the lawsuit. Your mother gets her piece. And you? You stay comfortable. I walked to my grandfather's desk. Ran my fingers over the grain. You know what my grandfather used to say, Mr. Hawthorne? Never make deals with men who hide their knives behind their backs. He chuckled. I don't hide mine, dear. I'm offering you a choice. I opened the top drawer and pulled out the folder Gabriel had prepared. I slid it across to him. So am I. He flipped it open, smirk fading as he scanned the pages. Wire transfers, blackmail payouts, hush money for scandals he'd buried for decades. What the hell is this? He snapped. Your life, I said calmly, or your death, depends how you play it. You walk away, today. You drop every whisper campaign, every dirty handshake with my mother. You vanish. Or I leak this, tomorrow, to everyone. His hands trembled. Just slightly. But that was enough. He tried to laugh it off, insisted I'd be sued for defamation. But he knew. We both did. He pushed the folder back with shaking fingers. You've made an enemy today, Cordelia Archer. I leaned in, my voice ablaze. Get in line. When he left, the snow had started falling again. Gabriel slipped into the study, his grin wide. You really are Horace's granddaughter. I dropped into the chair, my knees finally giving out. Gabriel poured me a glass of whiskey from the sideboard. To the kitchen girl, he said, raising it. I clinked my glass to his. May she never come back. As I stared into the fire that night, I knew the battles would keep coming. My mother would find new allies. The board would test me again. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. The estate was mine now. The company was mine. My voice was mine. And no one, family or foe, would ever make me eat alone in the kitchen again. The snow didn't stop for days after Hawthorne left the estate, his threat still echoing through the marble halls like a storm waiting to break. But for once I didn't feel the fear of it. I felt ready. Each morning I woke up before dawn, pulling on my grandfather's old sweater, watching the frost turn the garden into a sea of glass. The cold woke something fierce in me. A reminder that the fight wasn't over. It was only sharpening. Gabriel called it the calm before the counterstrike. He'd been holed up in one of the guest rooms for days, the desk buried under folders, and his laptop always glowing with some new secret. He'd set up a network of private investigators, whistleblowers, even a retired hacker or two. I didn't ask for details. Sometimes you don't want to see how the sausage is made. You just want it on your plate when it's time to eat. Miles spent his days at the estate now, too. He'd traded his expensive city suits for thick wool sweaters and the worn slippers he claimed had been a gift from my grandfather decades ago. In the evenings, I'd catch him by the fireplace, pen in hand, scribbling notes on yellow legal pads. The old wolf was always working, always watching. And sometimes, when I'd walk into the room, he'd look at me the same way he looked at the roaring fire, like he knew it could warm him or burn him alive. One morning, as I sipped my coffee in the library, Miles dropped a stack of old files onto the table in front of me. They smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. Your grandfather kept meticulous records, he said. But he also kept secrets. He didn't want these to surface unless he was gone. I flipped through them. Letters, scribbled notes in my grandfather's spidery handwriting, and pages of minutes from board meetings that predated my birth. Names leapt out at me. Family names. Deals made in back rooms, favors traded for silence. And under it all, an undercurrent of rot that my grandfather must have known would eat away at everything if left unchecked. He left this for you, Miles said. To remind you, every seat at your table has a price, and some of them might be too expensive to keep. I looked up at him, the flames of the nearby fire reflecting in his glasses. Is that your way of telling me to clean house? He shrugged. Sometimes you have to tear out the roots if you want anything to grow back. It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but deep down I knew he was right. .. That night, I called a meeting with Gabriel and Miles. We sat around the kitchen table, my grandfather's favorite place to have his late-night tea and arguments. I laid out the files, spreading them like tarot cards between us. These people? They're family, I said. Some of them raised me. They taught me how to tie my shoes, wipe scraped knees, hold a fork properly. Now I'm supposed to cut them out like they're tumors. Gabriel leaned back in his chair, eyes sharp. You said it yourself, chairwoman. Family made you eat in the kitchen while they feasted. Family laughed when you struggled. You want to give them a free seat at the head of your table now? Miles drummed his fingers on the table. This is your test, Cordelia. Not if you're ruthless enough, but if you're strong enough to choose what this family becomes after you're done. The fire crackled behind us. I thought of my grandfather's voice. They'll love you when you're useful. They'll devour you when you're not. I closed the files one by one. Then we cut them. Every last one that's been feeding off Archer Holdings like it's a trust fund buffet. Gabriel's grin was wicked. Good. I already have a list. Miles raised his glass of tea. To the girl in the kitchen. I raised mine too. May she never eat alone again. The next week was a surgical strike. Gabriel's team dropped financial audits on certain board members, like bombs, mysterious holes in personal accounts, conflicts of interest hidden behind shell companies. One by one, the parasites scurried into the light. Some resigned before they could be ousted. Others tried to fight back. Lawsuits, threats, even a smear campaign calling me unstable. But the more they shouted, the more obvious their desperation became. Meanwhile, Miles and I worked on the next move, replacing them. I made calls to people my grandfather had always trusted, but who'd been pushed out over the years. Old allies with spines of steel and grudges still burning. We brought them back into the fold, one cautious handshake at a time. It wasn't easy. Some nights I collapsed into bed so tired I thought my bones would shatter. But every morning I got back up, pulled on my coat, and sat at that library table again. One day, I found Mrs. Bright waiting for me there with a thermos of coffee and a slice of her special lemon loaf. You're doing good work, Miss Cordelia, she said, pouring the coffee into my mug. Your grandfather would be proud. I looked at her, my eyes stinging. I don't feel proud. I feel like I'm becoming something I don't recognize. She patted my hand. Good. The Cordelia you knew wouldn't have survived this. It was harsh. But she was right. 2 weeks after the purge began, I called for a family meeting. Not the board. Not the lawyers. Blood only. We gathered in the great dining room, the same place where they'd once made me eat scraps by the kitchen door. Now I sat at the head of the long table, my grandfather's chair solid under me, my name embroidered into the linen napkins like a banner. My mother was there, her hair perfect, her smile brittle as porcelain, Aunt Meredith with her fake pearls and sharper tongue, cousins who looked anywhere but my eyes. And there was me, Cordelia Archer, 27, wearing my grandfather's signet ring and the hard edge I'd forged in weeks of war. I know why you're all here, I began, voice calm. You want to know what happens next, whether you're still welcome at this table. Aunt Meredith scoffed. This is absurd, Cordelia. We're family. I slammed my palm on the table just once. The echo silenced her. Family? I asked. Family when you needed my signature on your loans? Family when you wanted your children's tuition paid? But when I needed you, when I sat in the kitchen eating scraps, you looked the other way. You never saw me. My mother leaned forward, her voice sugar and cyanide. Darling, don't do something you'll regret. You're too young to understand how this world works. We guide you, you listen. That's how it's always been. I laughed, a sound that felt like splintered glass in my throat. You think I'm too young? You think I'm naive? I've spent every day since Thanksgiving proving you wrong. I lifted a folder, Gabriel's folder, and dropped it onto the table. Inside, this is everything I need to cut every leech off my company, my home, my life. Some of you have been selling my name to Hawthorne. Some of you have been forging signatures, hiding accounts, siphoning money through charities. It's over. My mother's smile cracked. You wouldn't dare. I leaned back in my chair. Watch me. I opened the folder and read names, one after another. Each name landed like a hammer. Cousins shifted in their seats. Aunt Meredith went pale. My mother's knuckles whitened around her wine glass. When I finished, I closed the folder. You have one chance. Resign from every claim, every trust, every shadow share you think you own. Walk away quietly, and I won't drag you through the courts for the rest of your lives." Silence. Then Aunt Meredith hissed, "And if we don't?" I met her eyes. "Then I promise you'll wish you'd never sat at this table." My mother rose slowly, her heels clicking on the polished floor. She stared down at me like she was seeing a stranger. "You think you're so clever, so powerful, but you're alone, Cordelia. You'll always be alone." I stood too, looking her dead in the eyes. "No, I'm just finally free." I didn't wait for her to leave. I walked out first, past the stunned faces, past the ghosts of old Thanksgivings, past the empty chair that used to be mine by the kitchen door. That night I sat in the study, the snow piling against the windows, the fire warm at my back. Gabriel came in, dropping into the chair opposite me, his grin softer than usual. "You did it," he said. I shook my head. "I'm still doing it." He lifted his glass. "To the storm." I lifted mine too. To the storm. Outside, the wind howled like wolves, circling the house. But inside, I felt nothing but fire. They'd made me invisible once. Now they'd never unsee me again. The morning after I tore through my family like a hurricane, the house was silent in a way that felt almost holy. No whispered arguments down the hall. No clinking glasses in the dining room. No footsteps pacing my sleep away at night. For the first time since my grandfather's funeral, the Archer estate felt like it belonged to me and me alone. But silence doesn't mean safety. Gabriel reminded me of that before dawn. He knocked on my study door just as I was reviewing a report from our forensic accountant. He didn't wait for me to answer. He never did. Just stepped in and dropped a manila envelope on top of the spreadsheets. "Your mother's not done," he said. He smelled like winter air and stale coffee. "She's calling in markers from friends I didn't even know she had. Judges, local media, some old-school ties that run deeper than money." I pushed the envelope open. Inside were printouts, emails, travel logs, phone records. A smear campaign building, brick by brick. My so-called instability, my incompetence, my reckless behavior. Everything they could twist into something ugly enough to plant doubt in the heads of people I needed to trust me. "She's gambling that if she can't beat you legally, she can ruin you publicly," Gabriel said. "One rumor at a time." I should have felt sick. Instead, I felt sharp, like a blade honed too many times on the same whetstone. "Let her try," I said. "I'm not the same girl she left in the kitchen anymore." Gabriel's smile was wolfish. "Good, because you'll have to hit first." I didn't sleep after he left. I spent the rest of the night drafting a plan. Press releases, statements, an interview with a journalist I trusted. A woman named Renee Locke, who had covered my grandfather's legacy with care years ago. If they wanted a fight in the court of public opinion, I'd drag every hidden family rot out into the daylight. By sunrise, Miles shuffled into the kitchen, hair sticking up at odd angles, his bathrobe flapping like a general's coat. He squinted at the folders spread across the kitchen table and at me, fully dressed, 2 mugs of black coffee already half empty in front of me. "You look like hell," he said. "Sleep is for people with nothing left to lose," I shot back. He snorted, grabbing one of the mugs. "At least you're not dramatic about it." We worked all day. Miles called in favors from journalists he'd buried secrets for in the 70s and 80s. Gabriel's people leaked just enough dirt on my mother's biggest backers to send them scurrying. Renee Locke came to the estate that evening. Brisk, blunt, her hair a shock of silver. She sat across from me in the same study where I'd first learned my inheritance was more than just money. It was war. "Why now?" Renee asked, recorder perched between us like an impartial judge. I looked at her, no spin, no practiced lines. "Because I'm tired of being who they say I am. I want the truth out there, all of it. Let people decide what they believe." She asked about the will, the company, the family. I answered every question. The humiliations, the betrayal, the moment I chose to stand up instead of stay hidden. When we finished, she clicked off the recorder and gave me a look that almost felt maternal. "They'll hate you for this, you know," she said. "Truth always makes people uncomfortable." I'd rather be hated for who I am than loved for who they pretend I am, I said. She nodded once. Good answer. The piece dropped 2 days later. Front page of the Sunday paper. Online, it went viral before lunch. Asterisk, the heiress in the kitchen, how Cordelia Archer claimed her legacy. The comments were vicious and glorious. Strangers rooting for me like I was a character in some soap opera. Others calling me spoiled, manipulative, ungrateful. But under it all, the truth was out. That night, I sat in the library watching the snowfall bury the garden statues. I was bone tired, but a good tired. The kind that comes from dragging something rotten into the light. Miles joined me with 2 glasses of whiskey. He sank into the leather chair across from me, his knees creaking like old floorboards. You did good, Cordelia, he said, raising his glass. I did necessary, I corrected him. Gabriel appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, smirk barely contained. Your mother's losing ground. A few of her old friends are already cutting her off. She's poisoned now. She won't go quietly, Miles warned. Gabriel shrugged. That's what makes it fun. I looked at both of them, my lawyer, my fixer. 2 men I hadn't chosen, but who had chosen to stand by me anyway, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. ... But the calm didn't last. 3 nights later, I was woken by Mrs. Bright pounding on my bedroom door. It was the middle of the night. She looked pale, a robe thrown over her nightdress. Miss Cordelia, downstairs. There's someone in the garden. Says he needs to see you. My heart slammed against my ribs. I grabbed my robe and hurried down the stairs, Gabriel already by the door with a flashlight and a pistol holstered under his coat. He flashed me a look. Stay behind him. Out in the garden, the snow crunched under my slippers. The cold bit through the thin robe, but I didn't care. A figure stood by the old marble fountain, half shadow, half familiar. As we got closer, I saw him, Uncle Frank. He looked like a man who'd been chewed up and spit out by a storm. His eyes were bloodshot, his coat dusted with frost. Cordelia, he rasped. I had nowhere else to go. Gabriel kept a hand near his gun. Careful, old man. Uncle Frank's shoulders slumped. He looked at me like he had when I was 6, scraped knees and a bad haircut. Like maybe he wished I was still that girl. I made mistakes. Help me. I should have turned my back on him. Part of me wanted to. But the other part, the one that still remembered when he snuck me chocolate chip cookies while my mother scolded him, couldn't. Come inside, I said. But if you lie to me, I'll bury you myself. In the study, by the fire, Frank told me everything. How he'd forged signatures to cover his gambling debts. How my mother had blackmailed him into helping her siphon money through dummy charities. How Hawthorne promised to wipe his slate clean if he helped them spin me as a hysterical fraud. Gabriel paced like a wolf, shaking his head. Miles sat silent, his fingers steepled under his chin. Why come now? I asked. Frank's shoulders hunched. She cut me loose, Cordy. Says I'm useless now. She's coming for you next. Really coming. Not just lawsuits. She wants you humiliated. Destroyed. It didn't surprise me, but it did ignite something bitter in my chest. You want my help, I said. Then you testify. You sign a sworn statement. You stand in court and tell everyone exactly what you did and what she did. His face crumpled. She'll ruin me. She already did, I said, voice cold. Help me bury her, or I'll bury you too. He nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. Okay. I didn't feel sorry for him. Not really. But I did feel something else. Clarity. When he left to sleep in one of the guest rooms, Gabriel sat down across from me. You know what this means, right? I met his eyes. We finish it. And I meant it. That night, alone in my grandfather's chair, I drafted the final move. The next day, I'd call my mother. Tell her what I had. Give her one chance to disappear quietly. But something deep down told me she wouldn't take it. She never did like losing. The phone call came at dawn, as I knew it would. I'd spent the whole night staring at the ceiling, rehearsing every word I would say, every line I would not let her cross. When the sun finally began to bleed pale light through my frosted window, I rose from my grandfather's bed, my bed now, and went to the study. I wanted her voice echoing through these walls, the same walls that had watched him build an empire she thought she'd inherit by birthright. My mother's voice was smooth when she answered, like silk wrapping a blade. "Cordelia, I've been waiting for your call." "I know," I said. "You always did like to play the last card." She laughed softly. "So what is it now? Another threat? Another childish tantrum?" I sat in my grandfather's chair, the fire behind me. "I know everything, Mother. Uncle Frank told me everything. Hawthorne's out of the picture. Your offshore accounts, the forged signatures, the charities that were nothing but cash laundries. I have it all. And when I'm done, so will the DA." Her silence was a blade of its own. "Then, you stupid girl, you really think any of that will stick? I am your mother. The world will never believe you over me." "No," I said, voice steady. "The world might not, but the courts will. And the board. And every donor you lied to. And the press. Oh, they love a scandal, don't they? They'll eat your downfall up like a feast." I let the words sink in, each one a nail in the coffin she'd built for herself. She hissed then, the silk gone. "What do you want?" "Your resignation from every family trust. Your shares. Your properties. Everything my grandfather left under your management that you thought was yours. You disappear quietly, or I'll drag you through the mud until the only legacy attached to your name is ruin." She laughed again, but there was an edge now. "And if I don't?" "Then you'll eat in the kitchen while the rest of the world watches," I said. "Just like you made me." For a moment I thought she'd fight, scream, threaten, but she didn't. She just went very quiet, so quiet I could hear her breathing. "Shallow, angry, small. You've always been ungrateful," she whispered. "Everything you have is because of me. Everything I am is in spite of you," I said. I ended the call. My hands were trembling as I placed the receiver back on the cradle. Miles stepped into the doorway then, tie askew, eyes bleary but alert. "How'd she take it?" he asked. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "Like poison going down the wrong pipe." He chuckled dryly, then crossed the room to place a gentle hand on my shoulder. "One more fight, Cordelia. And then maybe, just maybe, you can breathe." I nodded, but I didn't believe it yet. Not really. ... The next week unfolded like a game of chess, where every piece had teeth. My mother's lawyers tried to file injunctions, but Gabriel's people had buried enough evidence in enough powerful inboxes that even the judges who owed her favors started backing away. The board, once divided, closed ranks behind me. Old allies stepped forward to give statements. Frank sat for a deposition with tears streaming down his cheeks. I didn't feel sorry for him. Renee Locke ran a follow-up exposé. Headline: "Family or Foe, How Gloria Archer Lost It All." Her network footage of me walking through the garden with Gabriel at my side went viral, the internet eating up the image of the wronged daughter, finally claiming her power. But inside I felt hollow. Some nights, when the wind howled at the windows, I wondered what I was becoming. My grandfather's ghost seemed to sit at the edge of the firelight, watching, his eyes sharp but proud. "They'll tell you you're cold," he seemed to say in the crackle of burning logs. "Better cold than eaten alive." I clung to that. ... The final hearing was set for a Thursday morning, a courtroom in the city that smelled like bleach and old wood. I wore a navy suit, sharp shoulders, plain lines, no jewelry but my grandfather's signet ring. When I stepped into the hall outside the courtroom, the air felt thick, with every whisper my mother's people had tried to spread about me. I saw them watching me, reporters, old family friends, vultures dressed as well-wishers. Gabriel flanked my left side, Miles on my right. Uncle Frank sat a few benches back, hunched into his coat like he might vanish if he could. He'd signed his statement, but I knew he'd never recover from what it cost him. He'd picked the losing side too many times. My mother arrived last. She swept in like a queen, entering her crumbling castle. Fur collar, dark sunglasses, lips painted a red that looked like blood in the harsh fluorescent lights. She paused when she saw me, and for a heartbeat I thought she might smile. But instead, she just sneered. "Cordelia, you look so grown up, all dressed up to slit your own throat." I didn't flinch. "Watch carefully, Mother. It's not my throat I'm cutting." When the judge called us in, I felt my heart pound like a drum. But I remembered Claudia's voice from those long nights before the press conference. "Control the room." I kept my chin high as I took my seat. Testimony blurred together, Uncle Frank's voice shaking as he confessed. Miles's dry recitation of my mother's hidden accounts. Gabriel's quiet, lethal explanations of the paper trails. And me, when I took the stand, I didn't break. I told the story of the kitchen chair, the cold turkey, the phone call from Whitlock, the trap my mother tried to set, and the trap I'd laid instead. When I stepped down, I caught my mother's eyes. I thought I saw regret there, but maybe it was just hate wearing regret's mask. In the end, it was fast. The judge ruled that the codicil in my grandfather's will stood. My mother's shares were stripped. Her control of the trusts dissolved. She was ordered to repay what she'd siphoned off. No one clapped. There were no cheers, just silence. Heavy, final. Outside, the snow fell again, soft and relentless. I stood on the courthouse steps with Miles and Gabriel. Reporters surged forward, microphones shoved in my face. I ignored them all. Gabriel shooed them back with a snarl. Miles squeezed my shoulder. "It's done now, Cordelia." But I shook my head. "It's just beginning," and I meant it. Because tearing it all down was one thing. Rebuilding it, that would be the real work. ... That night, back at the estate, the fire roared in the study. Mrs. Bright brought me tea and a plate of buttered toast, the same way she did when I was 6 and homesick here. I ate it sitting in my grandfather's chair, staring into the flames. Miles sat across from me, Gabriel perched on the edge of the desk, a whiskey glass dangling from his fingers. "You did it," Miles said softly. "You took it all back." "No," I said. "I claimed it for the first time." Gabriel raised his glass. "To the girl who ate in the kitchen." I raised my cup in return. May she rest in peace. But I knew she wouldn't. She was the fire in my bones now. The reminder that no door could be slammed in my face again. That no family name could be wielded like a knife against me again. Tomorrow, I'd meet with the new board, plan the company's future. I'd walk every corridor my grandfather built, every shipyard, every foundation he funded. I'd rebuild trust where rot had festered. And I'd do it my way. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. I listened to it and smiled. Let them come. Let them whisper. Let them try to take my seat at the table. I'd built my own chair now, and I'd never eat alone again. It snowed for 3 days straight after the final court ruling, burying the Archer estate under a blanket so white and heavy, it seemed to erase the blood and teeth of every battle fought inside its walls. I spent those days walking the grounds in my grandfather's old wool coat, the wind biting my cheeks raw. Every crunch of my boots over the drifts felt like a promise. I would not let this place become a tomb again. Not for me. Not for the company. Not for anyone who would come after. Inside, the house creaked like an old ship settling in new waters. Some rooms felt lighter now, unburdened of secrets that used to drip from the walls like rot. But other rooms seemed to watch me still. Portraits of long-dead archers glaring down from gilded frames. "What will you do with us now, Cordelia?" They seemed to ask. "How will you hold the empire that broke us all?" I didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time I felt ready to find them. ... On the 4th morning, I gathered the new board in the study. It felt right. No rented conference room in the city. No glass tower that smelled like money and ambition. Just my grandfather's books lining the walls, the fire crackling, Mrs. Bright's tea steaming in porcelain cups. I looked around the table. Old loyalists my grandfather had trusted but who'd been forced out. Sharp, steady hands with scars to prove they'd earned their place. I saw Mr. Whitlock too, my grandfather's lawyer, seated at the far end, eyes twinkling like he'd known this day would come long before I did. "We're going to rebuild," I told them, "not just the numbers on a balance sheet, the soul of this company. The family my grandfather tried to protect. No more backroom deals. No more hollow charity galas that hide skeletons. No more empty chairs at the kitchen table." A murmur of approval rippled around the room. I knew some of them doubted me still. Too young, too raw, too dangerous, but they also knew I'd earned my seat. They'd watched me tear down walls they'd been too afraid to touch. After the meeting, Whitlock lingered. He looked older than I remembered, his hair whiter, but his smile just as sly. "He'd be proud of you, you know," he said. I swallowed. "Would he? He left me a war." Whitlock shrugged. "And you won it. The trick now is to rule the peace." I walked him to the door, the snow drifting through the garden behind him. Before he stepped into his car, he turned back and said, "Just remember, Cordelia, some of the people you save today will be the same ones who come for your throat tomorrow. Make your peace with that now. .. The next few weeks were a blur of work. Meetings bled into nights by the fire, spreadsheets and blueprints stacked so high on my grandfather's old desk that Mrs. Bright once threatened to throw them into the flames if I didn't take a break. I didn't listen. I couldn't. Every hour I wasted was an hour someone else found a new way to chip at what I'd built. But sometimes, late at night, I'd catch my reflection in the dark window, hair pulled back, shadows under my eyes. A woman who looked nothing like the girl they'd forced to eat cold turkey by the sink. And I'd wonder, was this what victory looked like? Or just survival in another shape? One evening, a letter arrived. Thick cream paper, my name scrawled across the envelope in handwriting I didn't recognize. Gabriel found me in the library, his boots leaving melted snow on the rug. "This came by courier," he said, tossing it onto my lap. "No return address." I tore it open. Inside was a single page. An invitation to dinner. At the Hawthorne estate. Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "Leland Hawthorne? He's either suicidal or ready to surrender. Or both," I said. Miles argued against it. "You've already cut his strings. Why entertain him now?" But I felt something deep in my bones. Some debts have to be collected in person. So 2 nights later, I climbed into the back seat of Gabriel's black SUV, the estate shrinking behind me in the rearview mirror like a ghost finally giving up its hold. Hawthorne's mansion was all glass and stone, modern, cold, the opposite of the Archer home's old bones. He greeted me himself in the foyer, his smile brittle. "Cordelia, I had to see the storm for myself." "Careful," I said, brushing snow from my shoulders. "Lightning strikes twice." He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. He led me to a dining room that felt like a showroom. White marble table, chrome fixtures, art so abstract it looked like blood spattered across canvas. He poured wine. I didn't touch mine. "What do you want, Hawthorne?" I asked. He spread his hands, all contrition and false charm. "A truce. You've humiliated me, cost me millions. I can respect that. But this dance could go on for years. Neither of us wants that." I leaned back in my chair. "No more bribes, no more backroom deals. Stay out of my company, out of my family, out of my life. Or next time, I won't just ruin your accounts, I'll ruin you." He tilted his glass toward me. Done. I stood to leave. As I reached the door, he called after me. "Your mother called me last week. You know what she asked for?" I didn't turn around. I don't care. But part of me did. Because some ghosts don't stay buried. ... When I got back to the estate, Mrs. Bright met me at the door. "Your mother called," she said, her voice hushed. Did she? I asked. My heart didn't pound. It felt numb. She says she's sick, Mrs. Bright said gently. In the city. She wants to see you. Gabriel appeared behind me, coat still dusted with snow. Don't do it, Cordelia. She'll drag you back into her games. But I knew I had to go. Not for her. For me. ... The hospital was gray and stale, the hallway lights flickering. I found her in a small private room, her hair wrapped in a silk scarf, her face sharp and pale. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Cordelia, she rasped. My beautiful girl. I stood at the foot of the bed, my coat still on. What do you want, Mother? She smiled weakly. You won. You always were so stubborn. What do you want? I repeated, her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I saw the woman she might have been, before greed turned her heart to stone. I just want you to forgive me. I laughed then, not cruelly, but sadly. Forgive you? You made me eat scraps in the kitchen while you toasted champagne over my head. You sold my name to your worst enemy. You would have watched me starve if it made you feel better about your crown. She looked away, tears sliding down her cheeks. I'm dying, Cordelia. I nodded. Then you'd better hurry up and find your peace, because I've already found mine. She reached out a trembling hand. Please stay. I stepped back. No. When I left her room, the nurses looked at me like they wanted to say something. But they didn't. They just let me go. Outside, the city was cold and loud, a swirl of lights and snow. I pulled my coat tighter and walked to the car where Gabriel waited. You done? He asked. I nodded. I buried her years ago. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. ... Back at the estate, I sat alone in the study, the fire burning low. The girl who ate in the kitchen was gone. The mother who made her feel worthless was gone too. What was left was me. Just me. And that would be enough. Tomorrow the work would continue. Tomorrow the empire would stand taller than it ever had. Tomorrow they'd know. Cordelia Archer was not a name to bury. It was a name to bow to. The final winter storms came hard that year, turning the Archer estate into an island of white and silence. For 3 days, the roads were buried. The world outside seemed to vanish under drifts that covered the old garden walls, the stone benches, the cracked fountain where Gabriel had first handed me the proof that split my life in two. I watched the snow fall from my grandfather's study window, my reflection caught between candlelight and frost. By now I knew every creak of this house. I knew the stories the floors whispered when I walked them alone at midnight. I knew which portraits still watched me like they doubted I'd keep what I'd fought for. But I also knew this. I'd rather stand in these haunted halls alone than bend my head at any table where I wasn't welcome. After my mother's last call, after the hospital and the final goodbye, I didn't say I thought the ache would kill me. But something strange happened instead. It burned clean. The guilt, the shame, the part of me that still wondered if maybe she was right all those years. It burned away like paper in the fireplace. When it was gone, all that was left was me. And for the first time, that felt like enough. ... The thaw came slowly. By the time the snow started to melt from the eaves, the world outside was stirring again. I spent my mornings in meetings, boardroom sessions where the new team and I worked through every line of our ledgers, every rusted hinge my grandfather's legacy had left behind. Gabriel stood at my shoulder through it all, leaning against the wall like a wolf, half bored but ready to rip out throats if anyone so much as looked at me sideways. Miles would drop in with his files and his sharp, precise voice, reminding me where to push and where to hold. They called me Chairwoman Archer now. Some did it with respect. Others did it through gritted teeth. I didn't care which. The name was mine. The seat was mine. One afternoon, I found myself alone in the kitchen. the same kitchen where they'd made me eat my first Thanksgiving dinner by the sink. I stood there, hand resting on the chair that had once been the only place they'd left for me. Mrs. Bright found me like that, the sun slanting through the windows, dust motes dancing over the worn floorboards. "You've come a long way from that chair, Miss Cordelia," she said gently. I looked at her, that quiet, steady woman who'd seen every wound this family had inflicted on itself and never turned away. "You should call me Cordelia now, Mrs. Bright." She shook her head, smiling. "I think I'll stick to Miss Cordelia. Suits you better." I laughed, a real laugh that didn't catch in my throat this time. Fair enough. She poured me tea and sat with me at the big kitchen table, the same one that had once felt like it belonged to everyone else. We talked about small things, spring planting for the garden, repairs for the old greenhouse, how the staff would get bonuses this year for the first time in too long. But under it all, I knew she was saying something else. "You did it. You made a seat for yourself at every table." When she left me alone again, I ran my hand over the grain of the wood. The kitchen didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like a birthplace. .. By late March, the estate came alive again. The creaking pipes hummed with new heat, the garden paths were cleared, the staff bustled through the halls with a lightness I hadn't seen in years. Word spread that the Archers were done rotting from the inside out. The calls came in, old partners wanting to return, young entrepreneurs with ideas that made the air in the boardroom feel fresh. One morning, I took a call from Renee Locke, the journalist who had put my story on the front page when it mattered most. She asked for one last interview, a retrospective, she called it. "People want to know who you are now," she said. "Not the girl in the kitchen. Not the heiress in the courtroom. Just Cordelia Archer." I met her at the estate. We sat in the sunroom, windows thrown open to the thawing world, the smell of damp earth and snowmelt drifting through. "Do you ever wish it had gone differently?" she asked. Recorder perched on the armrest between us. "Sometimes," I said honestly. "I wish the people I loved hadn't been the first to put knives in my back. I wish my mother had been different. But if she had been, maybe I wouldn't have learned to stand on my own." Renee watched me closely. "And now? Are you afraid they'll come for you again?" I smiled. "Of course they will. That's how you know you're holding something worth fighting for." When she left, I found Gabriel in the library, sprawled on the old leather sofa, reading one of my grandfather's ancient business ledgers. He glanced up, smirked. "You keep talking to the press, chairwoman. They'll turn you into a legend." "Better that than a footnote," I shot back. He laughed and tossed the book aside. "So what now? No more enemies left to gut. No more family to tear down. You ready to be just normal?" "Normal?" I echoed. "I don't think that word will ever fit me again." I dropped onto the arm of the sofa, staring out the tall windows at the garden, where the snow was nearly gone. "Now we build. We take every scar they gave me and turn it into something that can't be knocked down so easily. We hire people who'd never get a seat at that boardroom table before. We clean out the rot before it takes root again." Gabriel whistled low. "Sounds exhausting." "Good," I said. "I'd be worried if it didn't." He raised his glass. "To the storm." "No," I said, clinking mine against his. "To the girl who survived it. .. Spring came late, but when it did, it felt like a reward. I hosted my first family dinner in the dining room. My family. Not the one that had turned their backs on me, but the one I'd chosen. Mrs. Bright at the head of the table, Miles beside me, scolding Gabriel for his rude jokes. Some new faces too, young managers from the shipyards, community leaders who'd stuck by my grandfather when the city wanted to bury him. We ate roast turkey, just like before, but this time every plate was full. Every seat was filled. And when dessert was done, I stood and raised my glass. "To old ghosts," I said. "May they stay buried." They laughed, but they knew. This table was mine now. Every seat at it had to be earned. And no one would ever push me into the kitchen again. Later, when the guests were gone and the halls were quiet, I found myself in the study once more. The fireplace glowed low, the logs crackling like a heartbeat. I traced my fingers over my grandfather's chair before settling into it. The leather was worn, the wood scratched with time. It felt right. I looked up at his portrait. "It's done," I whispered, "and it's just beginning." Tomorrow the fights would come again. The world would find new ways to test me. But I was ready. Because sometimes it takes eating alone in the kitchen to learn you deserve the best seat in the house. And sometimes the best revenge isn't ruin. It's rebuilding something no one can tear down. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.